Hello there, Books of Some Substance listeners. In an effort to bring you more content and release at least one new episode every month, we present our inaugural supplemental episode. These episodes will be short and come in a variety of content. We hope to bring you thematic episodes, special guests, interviews with authors, Q&As, or, as is the case with the episode you are about to listen to, a discussion of a work of nonfiction by the Boocklub selected author. And, as a reminder, please give us a rating on iTunes or wherever you happen to listen. Follow us at Twitter or Instagram at Books.O.Substance. Please share these episodes with friends and family, and enjoy. He had lived and died in an intolerable bitterness of spirit, and it frightened me as we drove him to the graveyard through those unquiet, ruined streets to see how powerful and overflowing this bitterness could be, and to realize that this bitterness now was mine. Hello, this is David.
Hi, this is Eric.
And this is Nathan, and welcome to another episode of the B.O.S.S podcast. Nick couldn't be here today, so Eric's filling in for him. Eric's another member of the book club here in San Francisco, so we're excited to hear his perspective on James Baldwin's Notes of a Native Son, which is a sort of autobiographical essay that Baldwin wrote dealing with his relationship with his father's bitterness, and the racial tensions in Harlem and how all of that relates to each other. So to jump off, we're going to ask the question that we ask every time. Is this essay of substance? Eric?
Yes, absolutely. The essay, just on its literary merits, is of substance alone. I think Baldwin is a tremendously eloquent writer, and if you've seen the documentary recently that came out, I Am Not Your Negro, it's hard for me not to hear his very commanding voice reading this essay to me. He was raised by a preacher in Harlem, and he was, being courted and trained to be one. I think he actually was a preacher at another church in his teenage years. And so just the essay alone, the writing is just, to me, just amazing. And if we think about the way he intertwines the different stories here from the relationship with his father and going to his funeral, and then the backdrop of the Harlem riots and his own experience with racism and his experience with his family, and the fact that his mother was birthing another child when they were at his father's funeral. I mean, it reads like this it's almost like a fable. It just really struck me. But regardless of that, all the sort of context that probably alone makes it of substance, just the literary merits alone, to me, elevate it to above a lot of the writing in this milieu for me. So yes, it's certainly of substance.
I totally agree. I think I didn't know much about Baldwin before. I didn't really know anything about Baldwin before reading this, and also watching the recent documentary. And from every angle that you look at it, it's an incredible little piece of writing, for its the literary quality and for the humanity that he presents and the timeless quality. I mean, it's obviously very much tied to the time when he wrote it. It's taking place during these race riots in Harlem, and those are happening in the backdrop of him dealing with this personal drama. But the lessons that he presents and the way that he tells the story is very universally applicable, I think. And Eric, like you noted, I mean, there's a sermonistic quality to it, in the best possible sense, in the way that he weaves these things together to tell a bigger story. David?
Yeah, I'm just going to go ahead and hop on that train of agreeing with both of you fools. As literary writing, it's quite beautifully done and beautifully written, the way it sort of intertwines these events. And I think it's done not only because that's probably how it happened, but also the way that he reflects on both of them and moves through them at the same time from beginning to end. As a reader, you get kind of what was more or less the thesis that I read at the beginning of the episode, that quote about bitterness and whether or not it was something that he felt he had within him, Baldwin. And you sort of move through the essay learning why he feels that this is something that he inherited from his father. So not only do you get that classic father-son dynamic of this is what you've taught me, so this is who I am, you get it with the key ingredient of this intense animosity between the races, specifically his father's sort of inherent distrust of whiteness and Baldwin's this desire in him to love all of humanity and yet battle with this racism that is all around him, this what he calls the weight of the white people in the world. And so he struggles to sort of reject his father's bitterness, and yet he does so in a way that really pulls you along as a reader, and I thought it was amazingly done, actually. I
agree. I mean, that aspect of Baldwin, and I'm only going to be able to talk about this in the documentary I Am Not Your Negro, but in both of those cases, this aspect of him really comes through, where he's willing to sit between two worlds, or between a decision, and investigate. I don't want to say objectively, but
well, I think that's the fact that he evaluates very subjectively is what makes it so compelling. Actually, he gives you that subjective experience. He doesn't divorce it from his own individual experience. It becomes very subjective.
Totally. I mean, I think there's a strong introspective bent to his writing. But I guess what I'm trying to say is that there's a line where he writes, shoot, I have it written down here somewhere, where he's talking about being between. Oh, it's where he realizes that he could have been murdered. So he's in this restaurant, very white restaurant. He throws a pitcher of water at the waitress, and then kind of a mob comes after him, and he escapes, and he realizes in a moment of reflection that he could have been murdered in that event. And at the same time, he realizes that he also could have committed murder. And there's not a judgment in that statement. It's like realizing all that was going on. I'm having a hard time articulating this, but it's like he steps back and he looks at it in a very intellectual way. That's not right either. Somebody help me out.
Well, I mean, I think what's very interesting about Baldwin's writing for me is that he tacks between this very intellectualizing of the situation and then humanizing it. And that to me makes it very complex. I mean, he's grappling with an issue that we can all agree that is an absolute wrong, right? We can argue that racism is an absolute wrong, but to really get to the nuance of why it's wrong and how it manifests is hard, and hard for a lot of people, I think, that maybe still harbor some of this, abhorrent thinking. And he really gets at the human aspect of it for me, and he makes it so visceral and so clear and so sinister, right? At the same time, you hear this ambivalence, in his voice about, there was a quote in, I think it was I Am Not Your Negro, actually, where he goes something to the effect that I've never managed to hate white people completely, but I've definitely felt like I've wanted to murder some at times. And I think just in that statement, there's so much complexity and so much ambivalence, right? It's like, if I'm really going to walk the walk here, I can't say that I hate all white people, but at the same time, there are times in my life when I want to kill them. And I think the essence of what he's about is there. And I don't have the exact quote that's similar in the essay, but handy right now. But I think to me, that's the essence of what makes him so compelling, is that he seems so human. He has foibles. He's not perfect. He's not this perfect symbol of the warrior for the African American race, say. He's acknowledging that I am a human being with faults like everybody else, but at the same time, I'm fighting for what is right, and it's really hard.
It is that complexity, and I think dealing with humanity as it is, not as an ideology, that maybe that's kind of what comes across. And I think, another example of, you say ambivalence, which sounds like not caring, which I think is the opposite. I think he cares very much. But where he describes all the stores that are broken, all the store windows that are in Harlem that are broken.
That's a great example.
And he's saying, that it would have been better if these store windows hadn't been broken, and the goods hadn't been strewn across the street. Like, this actually didn't accomplish anything.
Yeah, I got the quote here if you want to read it.
Yeah, go for it.
So there's a few things going on here, but I'll start with, none of this was doing anybody any good. It would have been better to have left the plate glass as it had been and the goods lying in the stores. It would have been better, but it would have also been intolerable, for Harlem had needed something to smash. To smash something is the ghetto's chronic need.
But that's what I mean by ambivalence. He's not sure, right? He's sort of like, man, it's horrible that they did this, but at the same time, we needed to do this for our own sanity, right?
But he even questions that need as well.
Yeah.
It itself is almost this little sort of poison that keeps coming up. I mean, he goes on later to talk about how, and of course this is true especially of the time, that this need to smash comes from an impossible rage that doesn't really have much of a release valve, considering the oppression of the time. Man, he's so tricky because he does what all of us do, and I think that's what makes it good, is he wavers in his judgment and critique of things, because he's not trying to prove something.
He's not creating like an action to take. He's not trying to clarify the situation or galvanize the situation for movement. I think he's really trying to understand.
Well, it's a personal essay. It's not an argumentative essay. He's trying to understand himself and what he feels he has taken from his father, which is this bitterness towards the world.
Yeah.
And how he doesn't want that as a burden, even though the world around him seems to force it upon him.
And in terms of that bitterness, which I think is really the overarching theme of this essay, and it's the parallel between his relationship with his father, his father's relationship with the world, and his relationship with the white world. And in terms of wavering, I think on this point he doesn't waver. On this point, he very methodically hammers it throughout the essay that bitterness, in whatever form, leads you to the image that he describes of his father at the beginning of the story, of being paranoid and sitting by the window and believing that his family is poisoning his food. In the fable reading of the story, that's the result of bitterness, and he sees that as something for himself to avoid, both in terms of his relationship with his father, which towards the end of the essay he finds reconciliation after his father's death, and is able to see his father as a complete figure, and is also arguing that in the issue of race, bitterness is not the right answer.
I completely agree, and again, I think what makes this powerful and relatable to people that don't share this experience is that he runs this through his relationship with his father, and to me, that's our relationship with our parents, regardless of who, where we come from and what race we are, is a familiar story. We've all had those conflicts in different degrees, of course, but we understand this idea of having the bond with our parents, but having to break free of it, and what we take from them and what we choose to leave behind is something that is, I would argue, pretty universal. And I think, Baldwin's move here is very intelligent. This idea that I'm going to start with the relationship with my father as a way to bring you in, and then to introduce these larger ideas around race and how these things around race are carried through generations is, makes it much more accessible and much more human. And that's what makes, the horror of the African American experience in this country just more visceral and more understandable to someone like me, who really has no vantage point whatsoever other than what we've seen from either peers or the literature or the media that we consume. And again, I just think it's a really intelligent, sly maybe makes it sound a little too intentional, but it's a really great literary move to kind of bring us in and be open to discussing these bigger ideas.
Do you think that in relation to that, who did he write this essay for?
That's a great question.
Does he believe, obviously race issues are very complex. Does he believe that he can build a bridge to people who maybe don't share his experience?
It's a good question, Nathan. What little I know about him, and what we've talked about earlier, where he still has this faith in humanity that we're all one humanity. He spoke about that a lot, at least in the film. And part of me thinks that he's certainly pitching this to an audience beyond his own sort of immediate peer group. But I don't know. It's a really good question. I mean, the guy's obviously wanted to be known as a writer first and foremost, and one of the greater ones. And so, but historically, I don't have any insight on that other than I hope a lot of people read this and still continue to, regardless of where they come from and what their point of view is.
Yeah, I would say at this point, whoever it was written for doesn't matter because it's for anyone who picks it up now.
Right.
At this time, it's so removed from that. I mean, you can read this as, like we've talked about on a number of episodes, as a sort of time capsule into this culture and this place that we don't really know now, to kind of get a better idea of what was the world like then. And I think that in itself has great value. But now looking at it, especially from our perspective, 3 straight white men reading a homosexual black author from the 60s, or at least this was written in what?
I think 54.
Mid-50s.
54. So even earlier than I thought. It's still incredibly relevant and important. And I think kind of going back to where we were at the beginning of the episode is that it has this sort of universal feel of, Nathan, you mentioned, and Baldwin has sort of quotes about a couple of times, this idea of that what will kill us, what really hurts us, is the sort of hate and bitterness within ourselves.
Yeah.
So there's a few quotes, and one is at the end of part 1, he says, "I saw nothing very clearly, but I did see this, that my life, my real life, was in danger. And not from anything other people might do, but from the hatred I carried in my own heart." And later, I thought it was a great insight. It was, "I imagine that one of the reasons people cling to their hates so stubbornly is because they sense, once hate is gone, that they will be forced to deal with pain."
Yeah, that's a great quote.
Those 2 quotes really get at the heart of how this, as an essay, is still important. Even if you want to put your blinders on and not see race and not talk about what may be systemic or not systemic or relevant today, at the very heart of it is this message, which I think proves Eric's points that it does feel almost like a fable. There's a lesson to be learned here.
Yeah, very much so. It very much seems to me that he's writing a universal story. He's not excluding anybody from this sermon.
At the same time, you could make the argument that he's writing it for him and him alone. I think that's maybe what makes it powerful too, right? Is that it's almost like this essay is him grappling personally with all these issues, and he's doing it in such a compelling and honest way that just makes it feel more universal in the sense that he's grappling with it in such an honest and acute way.
I absolutely agree. I think that's probably a better way to put it, actually. I think that is what makes it universal, is that he's looking at himself.
We always talk about this idea that, for me personally, the best literature is the literature that, rather than providing easy answers, actually, makes you grapple with big questions. And there's no doubt that this essay is him grappling with big questions, and by extension, we grapple with them too. And that's one of the big pluses for it for me, is that I come away with no easy answers, but at least I'm thinking about this stuff in a way that maybe I didn't think about it before.
I wanted to talk a little bit just about some of the formal aspects of the essay, which I found also impressive. In this sort of, we talked about how he weaves together these various narratives in a way that never feels disconnected, even though he's jumping through time a bit, and talking about his personal experience in New Jersey, his experience as a child at home, coming back for his father's funeral. So there's a lot going on in a fairly short essay, but there's this theme of his relationship with his father that runs throughout the whole thing. And particularly, I think I wanted to bring up part 3, where he starts to conclude the thing. And he's been talking about bitterness this whole time, and he introduces part 3, and his first line is, "For my father's funeral, I had nothing black to wear." And I think that's just kind of a wink that he's not taking on this part of his father, or he's starting to kind of reject the bitterness of his father. And then in the same paragraph, he says that after the funeral, he's decided that he's going to go party anyway, because it's his 19th birthday. And I think that again, and whether these are actual facts of the situation or is this, creative license to flesh out this fable that he's telling. I didn't actually pick up on these until I was reading it the second time and kind of filtering it through with a bit more of a lens towards this. But I thought that was pretty neat.
Well, that's what's amazing about this essay. I mean, if you were in a writing class, this would be the classic teacher going, I know all this stuff is true, but you just can't write this because no one's going to believe it, right? This idea that your father died while your mother was giving birth, it was your birthday, the riots happened, you happened to be at the hotel where the cop, got in the face of somebody else, and that's what started it. I mean, it feels like this, if you lay it out in a very sort of structural way, it's ridiculously contrived even, right? But somehow he manages to weave this stuff in a way, again, that is so, delicately and detailed and such specificity that it feels so genuine and so, heartfelt, maybe for lack of a better description, that it doesn't bother you, or at least it didn't bother me.
I think it's his writing craft too. It's so, I didn't consciously pick up on a lot of these cues going through. I just was kind of like, okay, this is the way it was. This is what happened. This is what happened. And he just kind of weaves it together. And you're like, wow, what a marvelous tapestry you've woven. And it's the craft that kind of like keeps you in it and never makes you doubt. Like, oh wait, did that really happen? Is that too contrived? And now thinking about it, I don't really think it matters that much if it exactly happened this way.
No, I don't think it does. And I think because he does it with such a nonchalance and keeps going back again and again to what his father was, how sort of broken man he became, and how that brokenness is sort of infiltrating his own existence and seemingly being played out on the world before him, right? I think because he remains focused on that, it sort of flows so naturally. I never questioned whether it was legitimate, like these things really did happen in this order, but I also didn't care.
That's the key insight for sure, David, that you don't care. He's rendered so many of the other things so well, and he's made you care about those little details so much that the larger sort of, backdrop and events are exactly that, backdrop. You're so involved in the intimacies of the story that these larger things just that we might get irritated by if we were in a film or reading a book more around sort of plot and whatnot, that we don't care because that stuff doesn't matter. It's not what grabs us. I mean, I just want to go back to the first question we asked, is this of substance? And I think we've been talking a lot about these issues around the African American experience and racism and what this represents. But, James Baldwin is just a gifted writer, period. Like, you take all those qualifiers away. I mean, really, this is one of the best essays I've read, period. And it's not just the content. It's everything, the form, the craft, And the more I read his work, as I've begun to do after reading this essay, it's just, the man is simply one of the best prose writers, period. I have to say that what I've read so far has just completely blown me away. Yeah,
and I believe the Boocklub selection is his book that almost has nothing to do with race in America. Am I wrong?
No, that's right. In Giovanni's Room, the protagonist is a blonde white American in Paris, and I think an objective in writing the book was to write a book without stripped of racial overtones. So that'll be really interesting to read. I'm really excited to read that. I'm really excited to get more into Baldwin in general. I love his voice. I love his perspective. I love his prose. I can't believe it's taken me this long to pick something up by him.
I know the short we're going to read in preparation is Sonny's Blues, which is also, Eric, I think you nailed it. This is one of the best essays I've read. Sonny's Blues is one of the best short stories I've ever read. It's also been anthologized in almost every major literature anthology. It's just such a great short story, from the writing to the content to the form, everything. So I hope to see that carried through into his novels, because I've actually never read any of his novels.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I think I mentioned to you guys that I read Another Country, I think about 20 years ago. I was in Paris and I went to Shakespeare & Co. and I was looking for, a book that seemed apropos for being there. And, I'd heard about the book and Baldwin, and I read it. And it's funny, I don't have a very distinct memory of really like, wow, this book is awesome. But I think it's also where my headspace was. I was a 20-something myopic, white kid who wanted to read about his own experience. And I think maybe I just wasn't at the place where I could really appreciate it. But what I do remember very clearly is, the book, the plot of the book, as I recall, there's just a lot of interracial and gay relationships and just, bohemia in a sense, as Baldwin saw it. And what very much struck me is how normalized he made it feel. Like there was no stigma attached to these maybe kinds of pairings or relationships that normally carry this weight, I think, maybe in other literature. And I'll be interested to see how that plays out in Giovanni's Room, because it seems to me that a lot of what he was doing in his fiction was to, give a voice to these maybe people that aren't represented in fiction and do it in a way that, it seems normal. It seems every day. And if that was one of his goals, I don't know if it was in his literature, I think it makes his, the achievement of his work all the more impressive to me, because certainly he was writing about these things at a time where I think it wasn't so accepted and so mainstream.
So join us as we continue diving into James Baldwin.
Next time
on the Books of Some Substance podcast. You can edit that out.
I don't know, that was pretty good. Like, all closing it. Shit.